Hey everyone, Trace here. And as you already know, the episode you're about to listen to is on Bryan Singer's 1998 Stephen King adaptation, Apt Pupil. Joe and I felt it irresponsible to discuss the film without also discussing the sexual assault allegations against Singer, especially given the fact that one of them allegedly took place on the set of this film. Given the content of this discussion, which includes accounts of the assaults from some of his accusers, Joe and I thought it best to offer a content warning for this episode. And if you or someone you know experienced sexual assault, you are not alone. There are resources that can help you heal and offer support for both survivors and people close to them. This includes the National Sexual Assault Hotline at 1-800-656-4673, but we will link to other resources in the show notes. And now, onto the show.
You might actually be the most derivative one of all. I mean, Christ, the same house.
Maybe so. But you forgot the first rule of surviving a stab movie. Never answer the...
I'm bored.
Wait!
And welcome back to Horror Queers. We're talking, I used to chase girls and now I chase old men. We're talking, I don't want to drag you down with me, but I will. And we're talking grooming for sociopaths. And I'm Joe.
And I'm Trace, and we're talking, we are fucking each other.
Although not enough. Although, I should not say that.
You're really just throwing us in there. Yeah, everyone, we are discussing Bryan Singer's Stephen King adaptation, Apt Pupil. And, well, it's a movie.
Yeah, folks, we were joking off mic that this is going to be a very lighthearted conversation that's not going to touch at all about the problematic director or the Nazism or the content warning, severe animal abuse in this movie. Just lots of lighthearted stuff.
Lots of things. Yeah, so again, proceed with caution. We will probably be getting a little heavy in parts of this episode. Although at the same time, I will argue before we get too deep into this, I don't think this movie goes heavy enough. But I'll leave it there before we bring in our guest.
Right.
Everyone, she is the co-host of the Losers Club, an award-winning weekly series that chronologically digs through the work of Stephen King. She's also the host of the Lady Killers, a bi-weekly podcast that looks at lady killers. You may also remember her from our episodes on Possession and The Final Girls. Please welcome back Jenn Adams.
Hello.
Hello.
I'm so happy to join you for this lighthearted episode, this feel-good romp through Stephen King. So excited.
Well, I'm curious, Jen, had you seen this movie before?
Yes, but it has been a long time. I think I probably saw it. I know I didn't see it when it came out, but I probably saw it about a year or two later, and I don't think I've seen it since. But I have read the book several times since it. So,
right. Okay, so gun to your head, book or movie?
Oh, book, absolutely, hands down.
I mean, that's never a question with her because she is such a Stephen King fangirl. But I also wanted to give a shout out that the reason we're covering this week is because the film is celebrating its 25th anniversary.
Oh, well, this was actually a first time watch for me. I had heard about it a lot, but I just feel like it's never... Well, this isn't why I haven't seen it. I just feel like it's never really talked about that much. But it's always been on my list as one of those things where I'm like, I mean, hell, Ian McKellen playing a Nazi, Brad Renfro playing a huge asshole in this movie. That sounds fun.
Yeah. Sure. Yeah, but it's not really a fun movie. It's very, very dark. And I think that's one of the reasons I don't revisit it. You know, and to be honest, of the three novellas in different seasons, which is where this novella comes from, this is the one I read the least, you know, because it's just really dark. It's really heavy, you know, and I like it, but it's not fun, you know.
Yeah, and we'll dig into some of the differences, probably in the production. I mean, I have like a bulleted list of a handful, because it is a short story, so it's not like I have a laundry list of things to go through.
Well, it's a Stephen King novella, so it's like the length of a regular person's book.
That's true.
So, Joe, I mean, because you programmed this, I'm curious, did you grow up with this one?
No, this is not a favorite of mine. It's one that I believe I saw on video. So I didn't see this in theaters, although this was a high point of when my sister and I were going to the movies. But yeah, this one intrigued me because it did look so dark. And I knew that Brad Renfro was a big rising star at the time. And of course, folks, he tragically passed in 2008 from a drug overdose. And I had heard a lot of people talk about him as a really promising rising star, but then he tragically died in 2008 of a drug overdose. And I feel like a lot of people talk about him in the same way we talk about somebody like River Phoenix, where they just never really had the time to get there. So yeah, that was basically my experience with the film. But much like Jen said, it's just so dark. And I do find the pacing, particularly in the last act, is a little bit wonky. So it doesn't really even feel like it comes to a satisfying climax in a way.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And again, like when you know what happens to the book ending, you're kind of like, oh, but it was a very intentional thing on Singer's part and him and screenwriter Brandon Boyce to not replicate that ending. They didn't want to do it because they didn't think they could shoot it better than King wrote it.
Well, but then why are you adapting the story? You know, like that's the point. I don't know. That's my, and we can talk about this later, but that's my biggest problem is that they did not use the book's ending, you know?
Yeah. I mean, I do wonder, though, if it's maybe just a bit too dark for what's essentially a mainstream Hollywood release. But on the Renfro thing, though, I don't know about y'all, because like I feel like a lot of people my age would have grown up with him in the movie Tom and Huck with him and Jonathan Taylor Thomas. I actually grew up with him because I was a kid who was really into John Grisham stuff when I was a kid. So
The Client?
Yes, I grew up his feature debut, The Client. One of my, for some reason, like my 7-year-old ass watched The Client so many times as a kid.
I watched it a lot too. It's good. And Susan Sarandon too. She's great.
Yeah, because my mom was a lawyer, and so she would read the books, and I would always see the books on the bookshelf, and I was like, well, I want to do that, but like they were, a little bit too mature for me to read. But The Client was one of his PG-13 adaptations, so I could watch that.
Well, and he's a Tennessee boy, so I'm a fan of Brad Renfro. Although he's from Knoxville, not Nashville. So,
so let's jump right into this then. And most of this information comes from various interviews and editorials from magazines in the late 90s, around the time the film came out. These include Entertainment Weekly, the Chicago Tribune, the Los Angeles Daily News, and the Austin American-Statesman. As you said, Jen, the film was adapted from the Stephen King novella of the same name, which was published in 1982 as part of his short story collection Different Seasons. And there actually was a version of this film that was supposed to be made in the 80s. Producer Richard Kobritz, who had produced other Stephen King adaptations like Salem's Lot and Christine, optioned the feature film rights to the novella, meeting with actor James Mason to play the novella's war criminal Kurt Dusender, who of course would eventually be played by Ian McKellen. But Mason died in July of 84 before production as a result of a heart attack. Then they went to Richard Burton for the role. Well, Burton died in August that same year, so he couldn't do it either.
Ooh.
So by 1987, production began with Nicole Williamson cast as Kurt Dusender and 17-year-old Ricky Schroeder as Todd Bowden.
Wow.
That would have been very interesting. I also really want to see what the 80s version of this movie would have looked like.
Right.
But in that year, Alan Bridges began direction of the film with a script co-written by Ken Wheat and his brother Jim. After 10 weeks of filming, the production suffered from a lack of funds from its production company, and the film had to be placed on hold. Kubrick sought to revive production, but when the opportunity came a year later, little Ricky Schroeder had grown too much in that year, so they couldn't continue filming. Basically, all the usable footage was abandoned, which I think amounted to about 45 minutes of a completed film.
Come on. I understand that there are things that go beyond people's capacity. Like, you can't control how much Ricky Schroeder grows. And obviously then you're like, oh, well, we don't have a movie. But just the number of films that I would like to see that were either abandoned or something went wrong. It's like, you had to know somebody was going to want to see that someday. Come on.
Yeah. But this is also a time, though, where like, public access to those things, like DVDs didn't exist. We didn't have special features on things. So I imagine back in the 80s, they were like, well, who the fuck cares?
Exactly. Yeah, it's like, this is just an incomplete film.
When the original option to the novella expired in 1995, Stephen King sued to get the rights back, and he got them. So, Bryan Singer first read the novella when he was 19 years old, and when he became a director, he wanted to adapt it. So once King got those rights back in 1995, Singer asked his friend and screenwriter, the aforementioned Brandon Boyce, who would go on to write such classics as Wicker Park and Venom, the monster slasher one, not the Marvel one, to write a spec script adapting the novella. They provided a first draft of their screenplay to Stephen King, as well as a copy of The Usual Suspects, which at that point hadn't been released yet. So it was like hey, like, here's my movie that I just made that's going to be maybe amazing. I don't know.
Right.
Wow, way to sell it, you know? Here's this incredible movie.
I've actually never seen The Usual Suspects. I feel like it was one of those things where I rented it like via Netflix mail when I was in high school, but I had already known the ending, and I think I started it, and I wasn't like, God, Joe, you're going to hate me. I wasn't in the mood for it because it was slower than I was anticipating.
Right.
Yeah.
It's a classic teenage Trace thing. Well, let me save everyone from sending you the message. It's well worth your time. It is great. And you get double the sexual predators for one now.
Yep.
Yep.
Yep, starring old Kevin Spacey. Yep.
I don't know. How do y'all feel? Can y'all watch movies with Kevin Spacey? Like now?
Not really.
Would you go back and watch Seven? Like, do you have a hard time watching Seven?
I think I could watch Seven because I feel like he is such a small part of Seven, you know?
Mm-hmm.
But I have not been able to watch House of Cards, and I loved House of Cards. So, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
But other than that, I'm not the biggest Kevin Spacey fan. So, you know, it's not a huge
loss.
I'm not losing a whole lot. Yeah, exactly.
Well, and maybe this is the place for us to start to dig into this a little bit, because we could have the same conversation about someone like Bryan Singer. Obviously, we don't have to look at him, but his fingerprints are all over this film, X-Men movies, other things like that. And I think this idea of separating the art from the artist is always just a little bit more complicated than we want to make it out to be. If we really like something, it's like, oh yeah, I can totally separate it. That way I can keep watching my favorite. And if we don't like something as much, or we haven't seen it, then we go, ooh, I don't know. So I think it's a conversation worth having, if only because we tend not to cover things that have sexual predators attached to them. And yet, I mean, I don't know, Trace, I don't think we realize how bad a situation this was until we started to research it. But again, I think it's a conversation worth having.
Yeah, I'm, so yeah, full disclosure, peek behind the curtains, everyone, like, both Joe and I knew, like, okay, yeah, like, Bryan Singer's known as the guy who likes to, touch, younger boys. Older teenagers, but definitely still minors, inappropriately.
Yeah, it's called statutory rape. Let's call it what it is.
Yes, that's exactly what it is. And but it's a thing where, you know, he's never been charged, but like Joe shared with me an article that The Atlantic did back in 2019, a very lengthy one where we are interviewing 5 different men who have accused Singer of molesting or raping them. And it
it lays out a pattern of behavior over 20 years, and it does involve the production of this movie. So we will talk about it. There is a very public lawsuit attached to one particular scene that we'll go into. But yeah, I mean, we wanted to reference it off the top because it does seem like, you know, we're saying, hey, everybody watch this movie. And we're not suggesting that, like, you go out and endorse Bryan Singer. That's absolutely not what we're saying. But we did want to have a conversation about how does art change when you know the details behind the people who are making it.
And Jen, I'm curious too. I mean, like, you don't have to chime in if you don't want to on this, but for me, it's always a thing where, you know, I feel like we've seen it with filmmakers like Roman Polanski, oh my God, who's the other one?
Woody Allen.
Woody Allen, yes, thank you. There you go.
Mm-hmm.
And again, of course, Victor Salva. But it's always a thing where I would never... I understand why anyone would be like, I'm not watching that person's movies again. I can't do it. Like, whatever, blah, blah, blah. Totally understand. I do think there is a tendency, specifically on social media, to be sanctimonious and have the moral high ground against people who do still choose to watch those types of movies. And that's kind of where I run into an issue with this, because yes, and we'll talk about this in the context of this particular film, I think when you know about Bryan Singer, there are a lot of scenes in this movie that you're kind of like, oh, this...
It's cringe.
It's very cringe. It's very uncomfortable. And I totally understand why anyone would say, I can't watch that. That is too much for me. But at the same time, I feel like more often than not, someone like me, or just plain me, is judged for saying, but I kind of find that interesting and fascinating to watch. Not that I'm deriving pleasure from it, but more so that I think it adds another, albeit very uncomfortable layer to view a film or view a piece of art through.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, separating the art from the artist is always going to be complicated. And I think a lot of it comes down to the individual, like how much can you actually stomach? Is this going to be something that is going to be specifically triggering to me? And I don't think any of us are like kicking back and throwing popcorn in our mouths and like having a good old time watching this movie. Like, we're not celebrating Bryan Singer. And while I would never like begrudge anyone for not wanting to watch this movie, I also think like we don't want to erase what happened, because if we do, then it's something that we forget about. And I think like this is also not exactly Jeepers Creepers, which is, a movie about a monster. There's a lot in this movie, Apt Pupil, that is really relevant now, and I think is worth a conversation. And so I think, it's always better if you can do so without triggering yourself, and if you can do so in a respectful way. I think talking more about things most of the time is better than trying to pretend it's not there. You know what I mean?
Yes. Yeah, I'm a huge fan of this idea. Like, we can't erase history. Like, this movie literally acknowledges that, right? Like, you can't just shut the book and say we've moved past it. But also, my personal way of approaching this is that I won't support new works from people. So I'm not going out there buying a ticket for a sexual predator, right? Because I don't want to give the notion that we should continue to support them and give them millions of dollars to make art. But if the movies have already been made, the closest thing that they can get is tiny amounts of residuals. So I stomach it. Maybe I lie to myself. Maybe, yes, I give myself permission to do the bad thing. But I say, you know what? This movie is already out there. Let's at least then have a conversation about it. This is, maybe I'm going to be the asshole here, but I stream this on Amazon Prime, so it's included with my Prime, but I'm sure he'll get something out of it. I guess I never think about like, oh yeah, how much money is he getting? Because again, and look, this can be a whole podcast episode in and of itself, but I'm very much the thing where it's like, but it wasn't just Bryan Singer that worked on this movie. It wasn't just Bryan Singer's baby. Like, there were hundreds of people, maybe even more, that worked on this film. So I know this is a debate that is thrown around a lot, but it's like, are we going to discredit all these other people's work for one horrendous person's involvement? And granted, it is a big involvement because he is the director of this film. But I don't know, like, me personally, I don't have those kind of moralistic quandaries with that kind of a thing, with like watching a film made by a predator. Right. I think we're presenting the different sides of people's responsibilities or preferences, right? I mean, I think one of the things I really liked about what you said, Jen, is that people can choose, and if they can do it, then that's fine for them. I think the other thing that we sometimes forget is that we don't get to control other people's choices. So you can talk about it, but you shouldn't shame people for their decisions in the same way that you have to respect them if they say, you know what, I won't touch this with a 10-foot fucking pole.
Yeah. And this will be the only time I fucking mention it, because I feel like I have to defend myself every fucking time. But no, I look, I have both Jeepers Creepers Scream Factory Blu-rays on my fucking wall. I really like Jeepers Creepers 1 and 2. And I understand all the shit with that. I totally understand it. It just really irks me when I see people publicly posting on like any social media, like, if you even moderately like these movies, if you still watch these movies, you are supporting a pedophile, you are supporting a predator. And that's kind of when I get like my panties in a wad over these kind of debates. Like, again, like everyone has, I think, their own personal choice with how to interact and with these types of films or TV shows or whatever. And I just don't think that you can impose judgment on someone else for whatever way they're choosing.
Yeah, I agree with that. And also, there's a difference between watching a movie and enjoying it and like singing its praises to the rooftops and like wanting, like, evangelizing it and like trying to get more people to watch it. I feel like there's a big difference between that. And that's where I feel like I can sometimes get turned off if there is a movie that is particularly offensive to me. And a lot of times it's just because of my own, my own baggage that I bring to the movies I watch. But when somebody is kind of shoving that movie in my face, that's when I get turned off. And I'm like, no. But somebody just enjoying a movie that I don't like, I can just keep scrolling. Or I can just watch a movie I do want to watch,
Yeah.
But, okay, well, so put a pin in that. We'll come back to that when we get to the scene in question.
Right.
So Singer and Boyce provide a draft of their screenplay to King and, the usual suspects. He was like, yeah, sure, and optioned the rights to them for $1.
That sounds like such a Stephen King story.
It is. Well, and so I was wondering if this is actually a dollar baby, which I don't think it technically would be. And, for listeners who may not know Dollar Babies, he has a program where he's got like a selected list of short stories and he will license it to a filmmaker for a single $1. But there are a lot of limitations. Your film cannot be longer than 45 minutes. And I believe there are limitations about where it can be screened. And you only have the rights for a year. But other than that, you can do anything you want with it. And so I wonder where this fits into the whole Dollar Baby of it. Because I know, I think the first Dollar Baby, who's the guy who did Shawshank Redemption, whose name I'm blanking on, right?
Frank Darabont.
I think he might have had the first actual $1 right. Maybe for Shawshank Redemption. No, I think it was The Woman in the Room. Sorry.
Is it Shawshank and Rita Hayworth? I'm sorry, that's Rita Hayworth. Sorry, Shawshank and The Body / Stand By Me. Those are both in different seasons as well, right?
They are, yes. And it's Rita Hayworth and The Shawshank Redemption. That's what you're thinking is what the novella is called. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, they're both in The Shawshank Redemption. And also The Breathing Method, which is a fantastic novella. It's the only one that has not been adapted. It's my favorite. It's about a woman in the 40s who is a single mom and she's about to give birth and she learns a new breathing method, which is Lamaze. It's fantastic. Everyone read it if you have not already. Sorry, I have to sing that praise every time because it's so good.
You mean there's something of Stephen King's that hasn't been adapted yet?
Yes, there are. Believe it or not, there's quite a bit. A lot of it has to do with female characters. So, hey guys, get on it. Start adapting this stuff, directors.
Tabitha, why haven't more people adopted my women-centric text?
I know.
Oh, God. Okay, well, so Singer prepares for the film by reading books like the 1996 history book Hitler's Willing Executioners, which confirmed his beliefs that Nazi war criminals felt guiltless and matter-of-fact about what they did. He liked the idea of the infectious nature of evil. So to answer your question earlier, Jen, about why he didn't kind of adapt more of like this about the novella, like the ending specifically, he wanted it to be more of a thematic film as opposed to an action-oriented one. So this notion that anybody has the capacity within them to be cruel if motivated properly. He also didn't think that the film or the novella was really about the Holocaust, believing that the Nazi war criminal could have been replaced by one of Pol Pot's executioners or a mass murderer from Russia. So because of this, he didn't want to like highlight a lot of Nazi like imagery, like swastikas or other symbols like that. It was more about the general concept of evil as opposed to Nazi evil.
Right.
He turned down directing opportunities for films like The Truman Show and The Devil's Own after the success of The Usual Suspects because he wanted to do this movie so badly. But also, he was financially supported by super producer Scott Rudin, who I think we just talked about a couple weeks ago in our Sleepy Hollow episode, Joe. They gave him $1 million towards pre-production, and they were going to start filming in June of 1996. But Singer and Rudin got into a fight, and the start date was pushed back and then canceled. So Rudin's out. Singer and his production team had to find other financing. So Mike Medvedev, a former chairman of TriStar Pictures, rescued the production with the financial backing of his production company, Phoenix Pictures, and gave them, instead of $1 million, $14 million to make this movie.
There we go.
So, okay, they make this shit, and Singer... Look, we'll talk about the other stuff later, but Singer previewed the final cut of the film at the Museum of Tolerance's LA Holocaust Center to assess feedback from rabbis and others about referencing the Holocaust, and he got a positive response. So he decided to proceed with the film's release, and while it was originally scheduled to be released in February of 1998, the distributor moved the release date to autumn, feeling that it belonged, and I quote, alongside other more serious-minded films.
Sure.
Sure. I guess February is still like the doldrums of of horror movie releases back then.
Yeah.
But they premiered it at the Venice Film Festival in September of 98 and then released it wide on October 23rd of 98 in the United States and Canada. And it grossed $3.6 million opening weekend, placing it in 9th place at the box office. And just a little screen cap for you. The other new releases that weekend were Pleasantville and the Kurt Russell starring Soldier. But again, this weird shit with like a box office. Pleasantville was the #1 movie that weekend, but only made $9 million.
Right.
Wow.
It was a smaller day and date.
It was, yeah.
Apt Pupil wouldn't even make that much money because it went on to gross $8.9 million domestically against that production budget of $14 million, making it a commercial disappointment. I didn't see the word flop thrown around, but this is basically a flop.
I mean, this is a really hard subject matter to sell. I also don't think that we were leaning into the Stephen Kingness of it, which I think probably would have helped, but maybe even back then didn't have the same cachet. Like, when people think King, they think the really scary stuff, right? They're not always thinking about things like The Shawshank Redemption.
Well, and the 90s weren't a great decade for King on screen either.
That is
we
true.
have Misery in 90 and then Shawshank Redemption, obviously. But, a lot of people didn't know that was Stephen King for a while. There are still people that don't know that. And it also doesn't, unless you are a Stephen King fan and you are aware that it is Stephen King, it doesn't feel like what you think stereotypical Stephen King stuff should feel like. And Apt Pupil, I would put in that category too. Like this, I can see the Kingisms in it and I can see where it falls in this collection of novellas because I know about him as a writer and I've read a lot of his other stuff and I'm just obsessed with him. But but I feel like if the average viewer didn't see his name attached to the credits, they would not walk away thinking, well, that sure felt like Stephen King, So there's not even a ton to overtly lean into because a lot of what makes this Stephen King is in the writing also,
Yeah.
Which, do you feel like that gets lost in translation then in the film?
I don't actually. No, I think because the story, I think, is an easily adaptable one. I don't know if easy is quite the right word, but it's not supernatural. And so it is, it's about the darkness in the human heart. And I think I can see the Kingism stuff in the text, but I also think that it's a pretty good adaptation of that darkness on screen too.
Yeah. You two may fight me on this, but considering Jen, you introduced me to it last year, this feels to me akin to something like a Dolores Claiborne.
Yeah, I could see that. I mean, I love Dolores
It's a little
Claiborne.
bit darker. This one's more about the darkness that lurks within you. And obviously it's a very masculine dominated film compared to the matriarchy of Dolores Claiborne. But it feels like it's got this intersection with memory and trauma and how do we deal with the dark impulses and can we all be driven to do bad things depending on the situation?
That's interesting. I had not thought about those two in connection, but I could see it. And I think when I think of Dolores Claiborne, I think of like you said, the matriarchy and the specifically female identifying trauma in that book and the good for her horror of it. And I would not put Apt Pupil in the good for her horror category, but I agree with you. There's a lot of this dark secrets that we keep and how they eat away at us. And I think this just happens to have two villains at the center of it, where Dolores Claiborne has one of my favorites of his characters. So yeah, but I agree. I do think there's connective tissue.
Now I just want to go watch Dolores Claiborne in that blue fucking filter. Like that.
It's so fucking good. And folks, if you want to hear Jen and I talk about it for an hour and a half with Gina
I think it's
Radcliffe.
2 hours.
Yeah, we do have an episode of White Ladies in Crisis / Did we do it on White Ladies?
Psychoanalysis. I think we did it was good for her.
You have too many podcasts you can't remember.
We do have too many podcasts.
Anyway, just search for our names at Dolores Claiborne. It'll come up. Blah.
And if you haven't seen Dolores Claiborne, go watch it. But content warning for child sexual abuse.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Anyway, Apt Pupil had a mixed critical reception. We're looking at a 53% on Rotten Tomatoes with an average score of 6 out of 10. Letterboxd users have given it a 6.2 out of 10. So, I mean, it wasn't like this film was trashed by critics. It was just very muted. And I think maybe that's why it didn't do better.
Yeah. I think that's also probably why we don't talk about it a bunch either, right? When you look at this, it's got Ian McKellen doing a frankly fantastic performance. I also think Brad Renfro is really, really good in this movie. I think Singer's direction is also really good. It's just that the subject matter and the fact that it didn't perform well means that it's something of a forgotten relic.
Yeah, but again, like, I don't know. Like, this film does deal with very dark subject matter, and I almost respect Singer's hesitation to, like, not go all in on the Nazism part and focusing on evil. But at the same time, and again, like, I'll go through this list of how the book is different right now, but I'm kind of like, but there was a lot of, like, more dark stuff that was left out of this that I kind of feel like the movie ends up being like a kind of a diluted version of that novel or novella.
Yeah, because it's not like when I think about what was left out, and I just reread the book the last 2 days, so it's really top of mind. But like a lot of what he left out wasn't the Nazi stuff. I think a lot of what he left out was like plot driven or just like because you can't put everything in a novella on the screen, you know? But yeah, I agree. I do wish it went harder.
Well, so here's our little laundry list, you know. So the novel takes place over a couple of years as opposed to just one. So it starts when Todd's in junior high and it ends with him graduating from high school. Basically, there are a lot more murders in the novella. Both Kurt and Todd are murdering people isolated from each other and then learn that the other ones are doing it. There is a lot more animosity towards Jews in the novella. I think that's probably the biggest difference. I mean, again, he's a Nazi. The novella's dream sequence has Todd rape a 16-year-old Jewish virgin as a laboratory experiment, as opposed to the shower scene we get in this movie. There's a scene in the movie where Todd can't perform with his girlfriend Becky. She's Betty in the novella. But in the book, he dreams about having her in a concentration camp where he can rape and torture her. And lastly, the big change is the ending, where basically instead of blackmailing the David Schwimmer character, he basically goes on a shooting spree, holding himself up on the top of a overpass, shooting at passersby, where he is eventually gunned down by the police. And so the novella ends with both of these characters being dead.
There's also a little bit at the end of an implication that when Danker / Dusender / Ian McKellen dies, that he is descending into a nightmare hell. Like he is getting some kind of like
retribution.
Yeah, exactly. Yes. And I think that's what I'm missing from the end. It's not so much that I want to see Todd go on a killing spree, because we actually don't see that in the book. It's just kind of like implied, and it tells us how long it takes them to like shoot him down, you know, but all of that occurs on one page. But I wanted, I don't know, I have conflicting thoughts, and maybe we can talk about that when we do get to the end. But I also, I'm recommending this book, but I also want to say it's a pretty tough read. There are some slurs in it. Yeah. There's some dated King language that I think he's a lot better about now. But, you know, written in the 70s, there's, you know, just be prepared. There might be some triggering stuff in it.
Yeah. Well, speaking of triggering, let's talk about the movie.
There we go. Yeah. So I'm not going to do explicit quotes, but I am drawing some ideas, and also I'm battling back against some ideas from an article called Frames of Evil, The Holocaust as Horror in American Film. There's a chapter in there by Carolyn Picart and David Frank. And the reason that I bring this up off the top is because to me, they conflate homophobia and homoeroticism. And in a way, they completely negate the idea that a viewer could be queer, or that you could bring any kind of reading out of this from a queer perspective. And they completely don't address the idea that Bryan Singer is himself a gay man who is lensing the film. And I think it's a really weird missed opportunity that frustrated me throughout most of the piece.
As is Ian McKellen, too.
Yeah, I mean, that's the other thing. It's like, it's shocking to me that like academics would not frame part of their analysis through that lens. And I think it's a very big oversight that mutes their argument.
Okay.
Okay, so with that in mind, now let's talk about the movie. So the movie opens in 1984 with Todd Bowden, played by Brad Renfro, and he is taking an interest in the Holocaust because his school apparently only mandated 1 week on the subject.
Just only one.
Everything you need to know.
Yeah.
So after school, he hits the library. We get a research montage as the credits are rolling.
Speaking of, by the way, also queer connection here. Both the editor and composer of this film is one John Ottman, queer man, director of Urban Legend's Final Cut. But I wrote in my notes here, this score goes hard.
It goes real hard.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I feel like we've had a couple of weeks of very, very good scores between Sleepy Hollow and Friday the 13th Part 2.
Oh, yeah. What about... Oh, you know what? I don't think next week's has a very, like, strong, bombastic score, but it's bombastic.
Yeah. So we do end this montage with a image of a very young-looking Ian McKellen, and that picture is overlaid with Hitler, just in case you weren't certain whether we were going to do some Nazi symbolism.
Yeah.
I do also want to say I kind of giggled and then felt bad about it when the "and" credit goes to David Schwimmer.
Which is... Because I think they were going to have someone else play his part. And I mean, again, because this is 98, they're filming in 97. So he's in the midst of like Friends mania at this point. But Bryan Singer apparently saw him in a stage play and really liked him and was like, yeah, sure, be in my movie for 2 scenes.
I do remember, because I was a big Friends fan all the way through, and I remember hearing that he was going to be in this movie, and I think at the time it was like Courtney Cox was really the only one who was in movies that I was watching, you know, and this, but this feels like such a deviation from Friends, you know, especially the character he's playing.
But this is what they would do, right? It was, I've joked with Trace about this offline in a couple of different instances because we've had conversations about the morning show. Oh, yeah. But it very much seems like the Friends stars were desperately trying to do what Disney starlets do, where they're like, I'm going to take a very mature role and nobody can tell me otherwise.
Right. Yeah. Courtney Cox is like, I'm going to be a bitch and scream, and it's going to be glorious. And it was.
And that's the thing, like, because it worked for Courtney Cox. None of the men in that show really ever broke out, like, film-wise. I think Schwimmer even does more producing gigs now.
Right.
Yeah.
But, yeah, I do appreciate the Aniston. I feel like it was well after Friends ended, like, maybe even 10 years after Friends ended, where Aniston started really embracing her R-rated, like, raunchy comedian, and I really appreciated that.
Like The Good Girl, and I think, was she Cake?
She tried.
Cake, yeah, she's Cake, yeah.
And instead, we've got David Schwimmer in a mustache.
Yep.
How about that? What do we think of the stash?
I can't tell if it's real or not. I don't think it's real.
I think it's real. I think it's real.
I thought it was fake.
Oh, maybe. Well, you know, I'm not a good wig spotter, so add that to my list of things I can do.
I am
not,
a terrible
not a
wig spotter.
Fake mustache spotter.
Oh my God.
Although I will say, your podcast has made me a better wig spotter, so thank you.
That's Joe. That's Joe.
That's true.
Okay, so on a rainy night, Todd takes notice of Arthur Denker, a.k.a. Kurt Dusonder, who is played by Ian McKellen, as they ride the bus together. And of course, you know, I think this is very strategically well laid out. So we just got that visual montage. It's clear in Todd's mind. And then all of a sudden he's like, hey, that old man looks very familiar.
And then we just flash forward a month.
And then we flash forward a month. We do that a couple times in this movie.
Yeah,
and
we
it
do.
Never gets less awkward.
Yeah.
So 1 month later, Todd's friend Joey, played by Joshua Jackson.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
I messaged Joe. I was like, Joshua Jackson.
I feel like this is like a month before Urban Legend comes out too. So like again, it's weird seeing him in this, but it's like because Dawson's Creek is like happening right now, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
He must have gone straight from the set to get those highlights in then for Urban Legend.
I think he just has bleached hair in that movie.
Maybe.
I think so too. Yeah. Yeah. Highlights is kind.
We
but,
don't,
you know, that's...
Forget the highlights. There isn't time. Just bleach it.
Just throw some sun in on it. We're good.
Oh my God. Just lemon juice the shit out of me. I got to get to set.
Oh, hey, it's still hot though.
Still hot. Yeah. He looks very baby-faced in this movie.
Yes, he does.
Looks so young.
Although, wait, I'm sorry. Did he also have bleached hair when he played that gay guy in Cruel Intentions?
He did, yes.
Okay, but that's before... I'm like trying to put the timeline
When
together
were these
here.
movies made?
So I feel like he did Cruel Intentions, then did this, so he went back to normal, then he got bleached again for Urban Legend, unless for some reason Urban Legend was filmed before this.
Maybe.
But he looks younger in this than he does in Urban Legend.
He does. Maybe they were like, that bleach is too whimsical for this movie. We've got to darken him up.
Yeah, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it's a wig. It's not a wig.
Maybe it's a wig, just like his other role. Okay. So basically, Joey is trying to convince him, hey, you should come to this party. Hey, you should ask out Becky, who is played by Heather McComb. And Todd is just too darn busy because he's got Nazis on the mind. So he goes to Dusander's house and he more or less blackmails and barters his way inside. So he claims that he has the old man's fingerprints. He claims that he has photographs, and he claims that he has a want sheet, aka an arrest warrant for this man, and that he's got it all stored away in the event that something happens to him. So I love that this high school student, right from the jump, is anticipating this old man's going to try to kill him. So he's already fabricated this plan.
So I will say, again, this is the first time watch for me, as I said. I walked into this thinking this was like a Rear Window style movie where a teenager realizes he has a Nazi living next door to him. I did not know this was the plot of this movie.
Yep.
Yeah. And the story starts with him knocking on the door. So, like, we don't even get any montages. And I love, like, he is such a little piece of shit in this story,
sucks.
you know?
Oh,
yeah.
And he's just so fucking smarmy, and you just want to punch him. And I love it. And I think Brad Renfro does a fantastic job of really making you hate this character while he's got this big shit-eating grin on his face, and feeling sorry for Sir Ian McKellen, too, even though he is a terrible, gross Nazi.
To the point where whenever he turns the tables on Todd, I was like, yeah!
Exactly.
Yes, you Nazi!
Honestly, yeah.
Yeah.
Privileged little white shit with a mullet is apparently comparable to Old Man Nazi in this movie. I love how the movie, to me, that's the strength of this film, and probably to the novella's credit as well. It's how it rearranges how we feel about people based on what we know of them and what is happening within their lives. And I don't think that this movie works if the Todd character is older or if the Dusander character is younger.
Well, here's the thing, though. So, like, they shot this, and Renfro would have been 14, maybe 15 when they were filming this. And he looks so much older. And I was kind of looking at some stuff because I knew he had died, but I couldn't remember when it happened. I realized he died like literally months before Heath Ledger died. And it was a thing where everyone that talks about him was like, you thought he was about 5 years older than he actually was every time you were around him. And yeah, he you know, really? And you see that in this movie. Like I was like, oh shit, 14? Like he looks 18.
Yeah, he looks 17, 18.
Well, and I think he has lived a life where he was treated like he was 5 or 6 years older, you know, and if you dig, it's a really sad story too, but like he lived a really tough life too. But yeah, I think exactly. And I think that, you know, I don't want to say that benefits him in this performance, but I think you can see that harshness in his performance here. Cause like there's always like this seething anger underneath Todd's eyes that I think really works for this character. But I imagine that might have been something he was taking home with him, or that's something he just lived with all the time. Given what I know about his life, I don't want to speculate, but you know, but yeah, it's sad, but I think it works here, you know.
I will say, I don't know if we'll ever cover this joke because it's not really horror, but it might. I would highly recommend Larry Clark's 2001 film Bully.
Oh boy,
this is one my husband made me watch because he grew up watching it.
No, no wonder Ari's in therapy.
He loves to like show me like really fucked up things, and Bully was one of them. But it's really 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 good, and Renfro is great in it.
Right,
that's one of his last like big film roles.
Yeah. Oof. So Todd is asking for entrance to Dusander's house because what he's really looking for is he wants to hear stories. Everything they're afraid to show us in school. And so that's what we get. That's where this movie starts to go. So we flash forward another month, and he's at the point now where he's obsessed. He's doodling swastikas on his school books, and we hear in voiceover stories of things like the failed attempt to gas children in the concentration camps.
We hear about, you know, the prussic acid took 15 minutes, the monoxide was an hour, but then there was one time where there was a leak and they didn't die. So after 2 hours, he sends men in with a rifle. And I was like, ooh, I think this was the hardest part for me personally to listen to.
It's very rough.
Yeah, and it's like that reading the book too. I listened to the book. But yeah, I don't know where I'm going with that. But like when he says like, I don't want to lean into the Nazism, I feel like there's just as much of the Nazism in the book as there is in the film. You know, it's hard to really soften this, you know? Mm-hmm. And I almost think the film would be like, it would be doing what happened a disservice to soften it, you know? Like the point is that this kid is attracted to evil. And I get not wanting to sensationalize or exploit, but
okay,
you know,
that's what I was going to bring up though, right? Like, so how do you tell a story like this without exploiting the tragedy? Because your main character, his whole thing is that he is fascinated with the Holocaust, with the Nazis. And so, I mean, again, I don't particularly find this film exploitative, but oh God, this is really terrible. I kind of almost wish it leaned into that a little bit more.
Well, because I think that there is a point to that exploitation, you know, and I mean, I don't know if exploitation is quite the word, but the point of this story, I think, is that like some people are really attracted to this kind of darkness and to that kind of exploitative story, and that this is how evil transfers, you know, and that it is the grooming of a psychopath. And I think like it's a story that I think we need to be telling more, because we are seeing it happen a lot more now than we were in 1998.
Yeah, we just shifted it over to rape culture instead.
Exactly, yeah. But like I feel like the fear of being exploitative keeps us from telling these kinds of stories a lot of times, you know. And again, you know, all the trigger warnings, like if this is something that will specifically upset you or re-traumatize you, then I don't think it's like your duty to watch this or to listen. But, you know, how are we going to get what a little shit Todd is if we don't hear the stories that he is obsessed with? And he's like, oh, I want to hear the end of it. And the Nazi is disgusted, you know?
And okay, so I don't even know if I want to like broach this topic, but it's like, okay, so there's a whole scene in the novella where he fantasizes about raping this girl in like a concentration camp. And that's obviously not in this film. And I'm not saying I want to see a sexual assault scene in this movie, but again, that's kind of a thing where it's like, but that would really cement this guy's evilness, like hardcore for me. And so it's...
I disagree because... and this is mostly just because it's the sexual assault component, and it's only because we have seen way too many texts, particularly male-led texts, that lean into that to show, look at how horrible this person is. I think we can do it differently and better. I think this movie makes a smarter choice by saying we don't need to include that because we can still sell how much this child is a bag of shit without having to veer into that kind of sensationalism.
Okay.
But also, I'm just like, I'm fucking sick of like female sexual assaults and rapes. Like we've seen a bunch of them, and guess what? You're not doing them any differently.
Well, stay tuned for our programming next month.
Well, I mean, unless she gets revenge, then I love it. I mean, I never love it, but it's an interesting. I think what we get in the story in the book, and it is hard to read, and there's also this weird thing with the dildo, which is not anything like any dildo I've ever heard of.
No.
But it's...
How is it a dildo if you put your dick in it? Then
that's
it's
exactly. I was like, I don't think King knows what a dildo is when he wrote this.
Tabitha, how do dildos work?
Wait, is he talking about a fleshlight?
More or less.
Is that what a fleshlight is? I'm sorry.
It's a pocket pussy or a pocket butthole, and you just put your dick in it and you fuck it.
Yeah, that's essentially what he's doing, except he's also sticking it into someone else. But I think what we get in the scene in the book is his insecurity and his fear, which I think makes him feel more pathetic. And I don't want to see this, but there's also kind of a core of like wanting to subjugate others and to like humiliate people. And this core of like, he can only be happy if he is like hurting other people. And I don't know if we quite get that in the movie with the violence that we see from him, you know?
I agree. I don't think we go there, or we don't go there enough. And I said that about the sexual assault, but with regards to the cruelty to animals that we see in this film, I do think that that's where we're getting that. And it's all about power, right? It's about Todd trying to control. He's so fucking angry in this movie. And you can tell he's trying to rebel in the most inhumane way he thinks possible because of what the Nazism offers him, right? Like, that's what he's attracted to. It's the darkness, but it's also the power. He wants to be important, and he wants to control other people.
Jen, question. Do his parents have more of a presence in the novella?
They do, yes. Although they are about as involved in his life in the novella as they are here. But as you, like, they start with a pretty good relationship, and it's just kind of like they have their weird little Todd baby, mommy baby things. That's weird. But like as the the novella progresses, like you'll get these scenes where he's talking to his mom, and he's like, if she doesn't stop talking, I'm just going to punch her in the face. And like the violence starts to come out in his thoughts a lot more.
Right.
You know?
I guess it's a thing I almost, again, I appreciate both the film and I guess in this case the novella, that it's not like he had a bad home life and that's why he is the way he is. Like by all accounts, like his dad is strict, I guess. Like that's kind of what we get from it. But like he has just a very like a quote unquote normal home life. So again, evil can come from anywhere.
The banality of evil.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's what I think makes this such a powerful character / story.
Right. So mentioning his family, we do have his mother, Monica, who is played by Ann Dowd.
Dude,
Baby Ann Dowd.
A very young and I mean like younger than what we have today, obviously. But I was like, whoa! I
did not recognize her at first.
No. I did not recognize 25 years younger Ann Dowd. I will say she looks very similar. She just looks a little younger.
Yeah. Although I will say there was one spot where when Bruce Davison first shows up and I was like, is that Gary Oldman just with gray hair?
Wow. Yeah, so Bruce Davison is playing Richard, of course. He will collaborate with Singer on a number of different projects. They also have a family friend, Victor, played by James Karen, who weirdly isn't much of a character, and I have to wonder if there were deleted scenes or just additional storylines that didn't make this final cut. But yeah, I mean, these are the adults that we see Dusander woo when he comes over for dinner, and of course that is cut a little bit short when all of a sudden Victor starts asking, hey, what did you do during the war?
Yeah.
We get that a couple of times in this film because, of course, it's important to remember this is 84. I don't actually think the film goes very hard in its period aesthetic. You know, I made a joke about the mullet, but obviously that was a fashion in the early 80s. But overall, it's like, I think sometimes I lose track of this film. It does feel much more like a 90s film than an 80s film to me.
But I also wonder if that's because of the 90s' proximity to the 80s. I mean, like, look, this, I truthfully, if I didn't know already this movie took place in the 80s, I don't know if I would have been able to tell. But I also kind of like that because how many times, like we've just talked about this, Joe, like movies made today that are set in the 80s, it's like, it's the 80s with all the 80s things you can find.
Yeah. I mean, folks, we're talking about Totally Killer on the Patreon, and it's a great film, but it's very much crimped hair and leotards and other things like that. You know, this movie doesn't do that.
Well, and I would argue it works better in that movie because that movie is like just an absurd comedy, whereas like I feel like Stranger Things ruined a lot of media for me because everyone's taking cues from that, which is fine, but it's like, come on. Sometimes it can just look quote unquote normal.
Yeah, it's more wood paneling than neon, you know, although I did have a crimped perm.
A lot of station wagons.
Yes. Oh, yes, we had a station wagon. I did not know this was set in the 80s until you said it, actually.
Oh, yeah. Like, 1984 is when it's meant to be set.
A little bit of a double take. I was like, what?
Yeah.
Because I thought it was set in 98 or whenever.
Yeah. So we did jump over one important scene, and this is going to bring us back to Singer because we do see that all of the stories are having an effect on Todd's dreams. So we don't really see... We see three significant dream sequences. This is the first one where he starts to see men from the concentration camps in blue set lighting. So in this case, he sees them through a kind of porthole. It's really hard to watch these scenes knowing Bryan Singer's allegations and his history of targeting and preying on younger men, it's really uncomfortable to see Brad Renfro as a 14-year-old boy writhing in only boxers, sweaty from this nightmare. And you're just like, we are leering at this underage boy.
Well, and I mean, I'm sorry, we're about to get to the scene in question, but like, we see his butt in this movie.
We do.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
This minor's butt.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, like, we see child nudity across a wide spectrum of different things. Like, I would argue we tend to see it more in comedies as a almost subject of mockery. Like, particularly in the 80s, men's bodies were kind of ha-ha things, unless it was Arnold Schwarzenegger and we were supposed to oogle those pecs and stuff. But yeah, it's, I don't know. I don't have an issue with nudity on screen, but when we start to go into like, this is actual minors, and then you add in the Bryan Singer-ness of it, this whole movie just plays so extremely differently from a contemporary lens.
Yeah, which, funny though, because I don't think that was the same case in Hollywood at the time, because apparently the Singer stuff was like an open secret.
Oh, everybody knew about these fucking parties. So folks, if you didn't know, we kind of spoke about it off the top, but basically he would just invite underage boys to parties and he would ply them with alcohol. He would give them lots of drugs. He had a whole grooming enterprise where friends of his would pass around and select boys that they thought were appropriate for him and his friends. Ooh. This article that we've linked to in the show notes, it is in depth and everybody knew.
Yeah, and there is a part of the article where it's like, because Singer has friends that are like, I never would have believed these accusations, blah, blah, blah. Mm-hmm. But it does seem like it's a case where Singer clearly has a lot of substance abuse problems, and he is, like, it's like a Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde thing, where he is one way when he is sober, and then a complete pedophile when he's not, which is not an excuse, mind you, but I just find that very interesting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It depends on which one you're spending time with.
Yeah.
Well, and every, abuser has somebody that they didn't abuse too. That's like, I never would have believed that. Yeah. Yeah. And I will say, as a person who's in recovery and has addiction issues, like, yeah, it doesn't excuse what you do, but I do think it puts it in context,
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. So moving forward, we see Todd laying out his research. We hear more of Dusander's concentration camp story in voiceover, and that sort of banality of evil, but also this idea that the Nazis didn't always really care about what they were doing is really cemented when we finish with the line, "It was just something that had to be done."
That. Okay. Did any of y'all maybe think going in that the film was going to try to make Kurt like a sympathetic character?
Mm-hmm.
I admit I thought we were going that route for a bit, to the point where I was kind of like, oh, this poor Nazi.
Right?
Yes.
I think that's partially how successful the film is at plying the audience emotional triggers, right? Like I can't overemphasize how important it is that we have Ian McKellen in this role, right? Because we don't want to think badly of this man. We've seen him as a concentration camp survivor in X-Men coming out just a couple of years later. So I think for a lot of people, there's a very strategic way of framing the Dusander character so that we think, oh, maybe he's not so bad. Look at him. He's a pathetic old sad man. And then you just wait a couple of scenes and you think, oh no, this is a human monster.
Yeah. Oh, also important to note, because we haven't said this, Bryan Singer is Jewish as well.
Right. Yes. Okay, so we get a game of shirts versus skins basketball that confirms that Todd should be a star athlete, but he's underperforming, and he's also blowing off his friends. Not in that way. Joey wonders where he's been. He's not seen him around a lot, so just a couple of months out, everything in Todd's life that doesn't involve Dusander is falling by the wayside.
Yep.
So this is when we get a uncomfortable shower sequence where we see Todd's school friends or people from the team who transform into emaciated, sick-looking old men from the concentration camp. And Trace Tell us about the lawsuit.
Okay, so first of all, I will say though, I actually do like how this stylistically looks. I love the shift in filter from like this from this bright like yellow to blue. Okay, so this scene was filmed at Elliott Middle School in Altadena, California, and 2 weeks later, a 14-year-old extra filed a lawsuit alleging that Singer forced him and other extras to strip naked for the scene. Two boys, 16 and 17 years old, later supported the 14-year-old's claim. They claimed trauma from the experience, seeking charges against the filmmakers, including infliction of emotional distress, negligence, and invasion of privacy. Allegations were made that the boys were filmed for sexual gratification. The local news and tabloid programs, stirred controversy. Basically, though, they wound up filming the scene again with adult actors so the film could finish on time. However, this is when if you go back and look at that Atlantic article,
right?
There's one account, and this is, I'm just going to read this verbatim. So this is Victor Valdivino. So he says his experience on the Apt Pupil set was far more upsetting. So Singer had approached him in a bathroom at the school and basically was like, wow, you look really good. I have a car, blah, blah, blah. Kind of like saying, come to school tomorrow and come to the movie set. I'm going to try to put you in this movie.
Yeah, he was just a boy who attended this school, and then he was recruited / groomed.
So, after being dropped off by his father one morning, he was directed to the locker room. Shooting was about to begin. He remembers that the locker room had been divided, a screen here and lights over there. A crew member gave him a towel and told him to disrobe completely and wrap the towel around his waist. He was 13 years old. He hadn't yet had his first kiss. I'm hanging out, Valdivino says. All of a sudden, Bryan comes in. He goes, hey, how are you? Real cheerful. And I'm like, hi. I can't remember his exact words, but he was kind of just saying, come back here. He kind of directs me, he kind of grabs me, and he takes us to the back area, which was kind of closed off. Like, this is the whole locker room. Valdivino's gestures to suggest the space. They're doing their stuff over there, and I was back here in the towel with no shirt and no clothes on. Bear in mind, he's 13 or 14 years old. Bryan's like, just hang out here. It's going to be all day. Don't worry. Singer left, and Valdivino waited for what seemed like hours. Eventually, he says, Singer came back and made small talk. How are you doing? Do you need anything? Every time he had a chance, 3 times, he would go back there. He was always touching my chest. Finally, according to Valdivino's, Singer reached through the towel flaps and, quote, grabbed my genitals and started masturbating it. The director also rubbed his front part on me, Valdivino's alleges. He did it all with this smile. He also says that Singer told him, you're so good looking, I really want to work with you. I have a nice Ferrari. I'm going to take care of you.
Ugh.
Yes. That was difficult to read initially, and that was even more difficult to read out loud. So this came out in 2019 in this big expose on the Atlantic. So it wasn't just this lawsuit that happened with with the nudity, it was also this. But of course, I don't think a lawsuit actually ever came from this. This was just in the reporting.
Yeah. Because unfortunately, one of the things that you discover when you dig into the people who have made the allegations is that they're almost all either like runaways or people who don't have a lot of connections, or they themselves have fallen into drug addiction, unhoused situations, and so on. So they become really easy to discredit if you are Bryan Singer and you have $3 billion worth of movie profits to lawyer up with.
Also really easy to target, too.
Well, and that's the one thing that this article kind of comes around to, where it's like the issue here is that you're exploiting the actual effects of trauma. Like, trauma can possibly lead you to drug addiction, to alcohol addiction, and make you, again, less of a reliable witness when these things are brought in front of a court.
Yeah, because the one case that actually did go to court and then it got dismissed and everybody said, oh, I guess Bryan Singer is vindicated. And here's the thing, folks. I'm not going to pretend that people don't unfortunately get accused of sexual assault incorrectly sometimes. But like when you look at this, as I said earlier, this is a fucking pattern of behavior.
Oh, yeah.
Like when you look at it, it's impossible to deny that this many people were involved or that this many people weren't harmed. But it's really easy when somebody says, oh, I thought I was here, and it turns out it wasn't actually there, and then their whole case gets discredited. And like, well, that doesn't mean that they weren't sexually assaulted.
Well, there's a bit too where they talk about one of the survivors going to like a support group, and someone else in the group was like, "Oh, you're one of Singer's boys." I was too. Like they had a name for themselves.
Yeah.
Jeez. Yeah, and I mean, the way that trauma works, too, is that you don't remember every detail clearly because your brain can't. And so
it's trying to protect you.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so reporting just a tiny difference wrong, like, oh, maybe he only waited for 2 hours instead of 4 hours. Oh, well, suddenly you're lying, you know? And I also think, especially for a boy or a male identifying person to report something like this, like there's so much more to lose if you report it than there is to gain. Like there's no reason for somebody to make this kind of thing up. And, you know, and again, allegedly he has not been convicted of anything, but I don't know, believe survivors. And
I want to read one more thing because this does involve Renfro. And Joe, this is what you sent me earlier today. But there was a party that this boy, we're going to call him Andy, who was 15, went to. And basically it says he went to a house and Bryan Singer directed him upstairs to the first room on the right, top of the stairs. Inside was a waterbed. He said he and Singer had talked about what grade he was in. Bryan knew I was 15. Singer would have been about 31. As Andy tells it, he and Singer weren't alone in the bedroom. Singer had brought along Brad Renfro, the star of Apt Pupil, who was now 15. According to two sources, Singer sometimes referred to Renfro as his boyfriend. Renfro sat sheepishly next to the waterbed, looking unsure of what to do while Singer and Andy fooled around. Clothes came off, but Renfro didn't move. Quote, I remember wanting Brad to join in, Andy says. I don't think Brad was gay or even bi. I think he was going with the flow. We talked about it. Like me, he looked around at all the things these guys had, all of the money. Maybe he thought the guys were going to do things for him. And that is that. He eventually did leave the room. But again, it's just like... Blah.
Yeah. Oh, well, and I wrote something about Brad Renfro a while ago, and I have not looked into this recently, so I'm not specific on the details, but this is like a pattern of behavior in Brad Renfro's life too, is adults exploiting him, using him, putting him in positions like this. And he is coming from, you know, he came from really, really poor family in Knoxville, and there are some nice parts of Knoxville, but it's not like a big metropolis, you know, and so money and fame would have been really appealing to a 15-year-old boy who is coming from an abusive home, you know, and it just, there's so many levels of ick in this. Such young boys.
Well, and that's the thing. I mean, not that I was hunting out like Bryan Singer or Brad Renfro stuff, but I was like, well, if all this is going on in this movie, like what was happening between Singer and Renfro?
Exactly.
If anything. Yeah. And that's that paragraph was where I was like, oh, and again, it's a thing where it's like Singer referred to him as his boyfriend. Like, okay, he's a 14, 15-year-old kid on your movie set.
Even if that's a flippant joke or something, the power dynamic is massive there.
Yeah.
Like you're talking about, oh, I'm the star of your movie, but you could fucking fire me. And maybe this is my biggest shot at stardom. Yeah. Because this is the director who's literally coming off of The Usual Suspects, which wins Oscars.
Yep. And to be clear, his next movie is X-Men.
Yeah.
Like this is the flop in between.
Yeah.
Okay, let's settle back into the film.
Yes.
Let's talk about one of the, I think, most successful sequences in this movie, which really establishes the power dynamic and how it shifts between Todd and Dussander. And that's when Todd gifts a Nazi uniform to Dussander for Christmas and then forces him to wear it and march.
He's such a shit in this scene. And it's so cold. Like there's like, because I want to see you in it. It's so icky and gross. And I love like how evil he feels in this moment, you know? And I agree. I think this is kind of a pivotal moment when Dussander starts to kind of, I don't want to say reclaim some of his power, but reclaim like some of this evil that's lying with, or remember that he used to be a little shit too, you know? Right. But I really like the way these two characters dance back and forth and how neither of them ever feel like good people, even though they may occasionally feel sympathetic, because I think that's ultimately what this movie is saying, is that evil transfers, and it doesn't always look the same, but the intent is the same, you know?
But I do agree, though. I think this is, to be honest, I think this is my favorite sequence in the film, because I do think it's the most effective. And again, it's challenging my beliefs, because this is the scene where I was like, oh my God, this poor Nazi. Like, because in my mind, I'm like, okay, he clearly clearly. He must regret what he does. What he has done. He's living with this incredible guilt.
The shame,
here's this kid who, and I wrote in my notes, this kid sucks in all caps.
Well, here's the thing. Todd gets to go. I mean, it's a great moment for Renfro because he says, I tried to do this the nice way, but you don't want to do it. So fine, we'll do this the hard way.
Yes.
You will put this on because I want to see you in it. Now move.
Ugh, God.
But, I mean, it's also really difficult not to read a sexual dynamic in this, right?
Yes.
Which I think is extra complicated knowing what's happening outside of the actual film proper, right? But it is fascinating to see a younger man asserting this kind of authority on an older man in this relationship where he's effectively playing dress up with him.
Well, it's almost like a Dom-sub relationship.
It is. There's a lot of sadomasochistic implications in this movie.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And that's what I think is really interesting because I think if Todd just happened to live next door to this guy and he happened to just be in his house and all of a sudden they started talking, like, I think you could really look at Todd as a victim here. And I'm not saying he is not a victim, but he is just as complicit in this relationship that they form. He's the one that forces it. And if not for him, it wouldn't exist at all. So I don't think there's any way that he is, I don't know, innocent in this. But one thing, Trace, you said something about Dussander living with guilt. And I'm curious about that because, and this could be me just coming off of the book, but I don't really read guilt from him. I think I kind of get a, just leave me alone. You know, I want to stay in hiding, you know?
It might be my preconceived notions about Ian McKellen as an actor, but there's a part, it's almost like he starts crying in one of the earlier scenes when he's telling something. But again, this could all be an act to get this kid out of his fucking house.
True.
But don't forget that this scene also opens with Dussander passed out drunk at the table. Todd has to wake him up to give him this gift. And so I'll confess, I do read it the same way as you, Trace, where he is trying to drink himself under the table to forget what he has done. He isn't engaging with the larger world outside of the house. Like, he's isolating himself because he can't live with what he's done. But these are all things that we are projecting onto the film.
Yes. And to go further, Jen, it's also a thing where it's like, eventually it is revealed that, no, because to me, I view this as, oh no, his evil has always been there. He is evil. It's just been dormant. And it's when this kid like gets a rise out of him again to where he's like, oh,
I can be powerful again.
I can be powerful again. I can have control over, and he'll verbalize this later in the film. So it's kind of like a thing where I feel not like the fool, but where I'm like, oh, God damn it. Like,
this is how he does it.
Nazi is as Nazi does.
God.
Yeah. Well, but I think that's important. It's because, like, even the worst people can play in our sympathies, you know?
Yes.
100%.
Some of the best psychopaths know how to play the game, and they know how to make us feel like they're just a sweet little old man or like all-American boy who would never get into any trouble. And I think that's part of what I really think is powerful about this story is that we see behind the curtain of all of that when they're two together and they see what each other are, you know?
Well, and I'm like a big fan of just really like honest, like uncomfortable conversations. And you don't, you can't really get much more uncomfortable than a Nazi explaining to a teenager what he felt while sending people into the gas chamber.
Yeah. I do also want to give credit back to John Ottman, who edited this part and the rest of the film, as you said, Trace. But the cutting back and forth between Renfro's face and McKellen's marching and the ordering, and we speed up as we go until the point when it becomes uncomfortable because you can see Dussander get into it and he's taking ownership of the action, and then he's given that Nazi salute, and oh boy, it is just, it's a lot. Like, this sequence is really powerful, and I think the editing does have a lot to do with that.
I do want to point out, too, so yes, we've mentioned John Ottman, you know, being editor and composer. John Ottman is primarily known as a composer, with the exception, of course, that one directing gig for Urban Legend's Final Cut. He is only an editor on Bryan Singer films.
Weird.
He has edited, I shit you not, Usual Suspects, most of the X-Men films, Superman Returns, Valkyrie, Jack the Giant Slayer, and Bohemian Rhapsody. But he's edited like nothing else. Like, he's just edits Bryan Singer films. Read into that what you want.
I was going to say. So they're clearly friends.
We might have discussed this actually on Urban Legends Final Cut, but
I think we mentioned it. Yeah.
Yeah.
We just refer to it as the Bryan Singer-ness of it all.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay, so then we cross-cut between two different scenes. So we have a scene with Becky and Todd in the car where he is trying to verbalize some of his, I want to say confusion, or it could just be, you know what, let's talk about evil. So he asks her, does she ever think about why people do what they do? And she's just like, ugh, teenage boys. So she tries to give him head, and he cannot perform.
Again, we don't get a lot of explicit queerness in this film, but she does make a joke saying, maybe you don't even like girls.
Once again, let's put it out there on the record. Erectile dysfunction happens to most men at different points in their life, so this is not an uncommon issue. It's a very cruel thing for a teenage girl to say. But in the space of this film, I think we are meant to look at it and say, oh, he's not going to get off from something as conventional as just a regular human sexual interaction with a high school girl.
Yeah, it's too vanilla. He needs that those concentration camps.
Yeah, or he needs to kill a pigeon or something.
Right. Well, and I don't want to be that person. Well, in the book, over and over again.
No, go ahead.
In the book, there, like, he specifically has to think about the girl that he had the dream about, where he was assaulting her. That's how he's able to get himself up. And he also talks about a string of girlfriends where it, like, he's fine to fuck them a couple of times or to kind of be handsy and then back off when they give their, like, when they demur, you know. But it's very clear that he is not actually interested in these relationships. And I think that's really interesting. And I think if this were I don't know, but not so much of a piece of shit little kid, you know, I would be interested in this 15-year-old kid realizing I cannot get sexually excited unless I am thinking about harming someone, because I think that's it could be a turning point where he thinks something's wrong. And I think part of what the film is showing is that when you have a kid who is this age, who is having these thoughts and they talk to the wrong people or they are around the wrong people, how horribly wrong it can go, you know?
Well, and like, how much of her, okay, watching this, because I don't know if I want to, but I kind of want to make a parallel to a statutory rape situation where it's like, how much of a responsibility does Todd have in this relationship versus what Kurt has? Because I feel like a lot of what happens, especially with people who are caught with in flagrante with minors, they're always like, "Oh, the kid led me on." It's like, no.
Yeah.
The adult is the responsible factor here. It doesn't matter if a kid was quote unquote trying to seduce you.
You're still the fucking adult. You're still the one with the power. It doesn't matter. This isn't fucking Lolita.
Yeah. Well,
exactly.
Though,
yeah.
You could argue, well, hey, like, you know, he's got this. He's gonna send Kurt to prison, but it's like, yeah, but like, man,
and go to fucking prison.
Yeah. That's not going to do that.
No. No, he's too busy in the other cross-cutting scene. And folks, extreme content warning.
Yeah.
Dusander, after putting on that outfit, getting his mojo back, decides, you know what? I need to put this stray cat into my oven.
Which, look, I am definitely one of those people that's like, ooh, like, show me a kid dying, show me a kid getting skinned alive. I don't give a fuck. Animals are hard. I know some people like bitch about that, but like,
show me a kid getting skinned alive. Jeez.
Like, seriously, like,
absolutely. Show me a dead kid any day of the week. I could barely get through this scene. I was so upset.
And so the fact that the cat gets away, I was so happy
Trace,
about.
The cat does not get away.
In the book, the cat does not. Ooh.
It doesn't die in the oven, though.
It doesn't die in the oven this time.
No.
We see a poster later for the missing cat, and it's pretty obvious that cat is dead.
His little comment about, oops, I burned my TV dinner. Ooh.
Oh, okay, but that is a little funny, though.
But in the book, we get the play-by-play of this happening, and it is so upsetting. Like, So I am glad the cat at least gets away when I can see it. You know?
Well, yeah, exactly. I don't have to see this cat. Because, I mean, this is where I think you even see the cat's, like, paw touch the flames on the top of this oven. And I was just like, oh, my God. Like, ugh.
I don't even know how they filmed this. And then if you read about it, apparently this cat was heavily sedated and barely moving. And there was absolutely no danger they didn't hurt this cat. But the way it is shot is so effective.
Yeah, this is the most uncomfortable part of the movie for me.
Yeah. And I thought that was going to be the book. I thought that cat was going to die. So I was like, no, poor little kitty. And I'm a new cat owner too. So, I know.
God.
It's like, if he put my cats in the oven, I would kill him. Sorry.
Oh, gosh.
But it is effective too. And I think it is an important scene in case we were feeling too sorry for him,
100%. Yes.
Yeah, it's important that these scenes happen so close together, right? Because just in case you thought, oh, Todd's the really bad one, Dusander's not that bad. Oh, no, they're both actively terrible.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
So speaking of Todd, he learns that his grades have slipped to the point where his college admission is going to be in trouble. And also, he just doesn't have answers for any of Joey's questions. Like, clearly his life is falling apart outside of all of this. Just wanted to highlight the fact that a lot of the interactions between both Todd and Joey, as well as Todd and Dusander, are shot in very extreme close-ups. So we are seeing a lot of lips, and a lot of this feels sexy. So this is when Todd kills a pigeon. So we've got back-to-back animal cruelty happening. I wanted to ask you two if you had any thoughts about the way that this is shot, because it happens in front of an open door in the gymnasium, and the world outside is completely white and obscured to the point where I wondered if people had ever looked at this and thought, oh, this is a dream sequence. Todd is just imagining this.
I don't know if I read it as a dream sequence, although I don't think I would disagree with you on that. I think I would tend to fall more into, oh, he is so consumed with fascination at having the ability to kill that he is not even considering who is watching, But I could see it as a dream sequence.
Okay, for the record, I don't personally see it as a dream sequence, though. I just wonder if people do.
I wonder, because maybe not so much a dream sequence, but like lifting the basketball up and just not slamming it down, or slamming it right next, because we actually don't see the bird die,
No.
I just got the caption that says flapping stopped.
I was expecting to see like a smattering of blood though on this basketball.
Right. Yeah. And we don't.
No.
Okay, so after learning that his grades are bad, Todd goes to Dusander and tries to suggest that it's his fault. And he even threatens Dusander by saying, they're going to want to know exactly what happened. And what happened was you. This kid.
Such a little
I hate
bitch,
this kid
man.
so much. I know. He needs to get punched in the face real bad.
Well, it does land him in a different kind of hot water situation because he has to meet with guidance counselor Edward French, played by David Schwimmer, with a wig over his lip. And
no, there has to be a name for that, though. Like, how like a pubic wig is a merkin? Like, what's the name for a mustache wig?
A whip?
Oh,
I was a mig.
Mig, yeah, a mig. My lip. I don't know. We'll work.
Oh my god! Except now I'm just imagining a spin-off of Jason Statham's franchise. It's The Mig, only it's David Schwimmer's mustache terrorizing people in the ocean.
I would watch that.
Terrible. Unexpectedly, at this meeting with the guidance counselor is Dusander, who is playing his grandfather, Victor. Haha. That's why we had Victor at the family dinner earlier.
Mm-hmm. That's the only reason he's in the movie.
Yeah.
I think so. And even I only just now understood that because I think I called him a friend of a family earlier.
It's his grandpa.
That was his grandfather.
I didn't get it either, yeah.
I loved this. Like, watching it, I was like, he's got you now, you little shit.
So true.
Mm-hmm.
I'm rooting for the Nazi.
The worst.
Yeah, there's an element of this that could be really boring, like, it's the grades drama. But I do love, like, the fact that I want this kid to get in trouble. Yeah.
And I think this is when the movie really picks up for me. And it doesn't really maintain this momentum after this, I don't think.
No, because it feels like we're exchanging tete-a-tetes, right? Like, it's blow after blow. And then at a certain point, it ends.
Yeah. Like, it plateaus. Let's say that.
Right. So the deal that Mr. French offers him is that he needs to get A's on all of his finals, and then they'll waive the midterm. So basically, he gets a get-out-of-jail-free card. And Jen, would you like to join me on climbing onto the soapbox to talk about white middle-class to upper-class patriarchy? Because if Todd was any fucking one else, he wouldn't get this kind of do-over offer.
But Joe, he has his whole life ahead of him, and we can't ruin his
little
potential.
boy. He deserves a second chance. Fuck this child.
Joe, I will always join you on a soapbox about the patriarchy.
So, yeah, this is when Dussander leaves them alone, and he does touch Todd's shoulder, and it's meant to be this moment of, haha, fucker, I've got you now, but it could also just be seen as an endearing grandfather touching his grandson, saying, you got this, boy. I love the multiplicity of meanings.
Oh, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And this is also when Mr. French gives Todd his home phone number for anything at all. And this is why I always used to tell faculty members at university, do not ever give your private number to any of your students for any fucking reason, because they will do stuff like this. Hopefully not sexually blackmail you by making it seem like you're a pedophile, but, you know, maybe.
Yeah, also they might call you. And then you have to talk to them. But yeah, that is a big, big, big no-no. Never give your personal phone number away, especially to a student. No.
So Todd is not pleased that Dussander put him in this position. He tries to yell at him.
Because he's got to work now. Poor Todd.
Okay, but here's the thing, though, because he was working before. He was a grade A student who was amazing at sports. It's just that he got so caught up in the Holocaust of it all.
Yeah.
And now he's discovered evil, and he doesn't have time for his studies anymore.
Evil ate my homework.
He's too busy literally doing crime and looking into crime than doing the work. Yeah.
I'm actually surprised. I guess maybe I'm not surprised because he's a minor, but like I'm surprised there's not a scene of him like masturbating, like getting sexual pleasure from one of these like dreams, hallucinations he has of the concentration camps.
I mean, in the book, he doesn't wake up sweaty after that.
He wakes
dream.
up cum covered.
Yeah.
Yes, for the first time. So yeah.
Which, again, given what's going on outside of the narrative of this film, I'm glad that we're not seeing. But had this been done by someone else, yeah, I think this is where you could have gone harder.
And that is the implication, though, of the scene where he can't get hard with his girlfriend. It's like, oh, yeah, he only gets hard from, like, Nazi stories now.
From pain, yeah. I am also sad that there's no microfiche in this movie, because we've had some studying and some research. And
it's 84. Prime microfiche territory.
Exactly. That was the heyday.
That would have been the opening credits, but we just get actual newspaper clippings in the opening credits.
You know what? Don't tease me with newspaper. I want that goddamn microfiche.
Exactly. We get so few opportunities these days.
So true. Yeah, so this is when Dussander flips the script, quite literally, and says, okay, now I'm in charge, and you're going to do all of your homework. We're not doing this anymore. I'm in control. And I especially like when he says, you've basically known me for half a year, and you've never said anything. So at this point, your plausible deniability is gone. And think about how much this would hurt the reputation of not just you, but also your parents.
Yeah. And this would be the good line, too, where he's like, you know, do you know what it feels like to have someone in your control, to have them know that they are alive only because you have not decided the contrary? That's the thesis for this film right here.
Right.
But again, like, did y'all get the sexual implications from like, go fuck, I think you should go fuck yourself. Oh, my boy, don't you see? We are fucking each other.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's the big thing that we change in this narrative. And if we weren't talking about how terrible fucking Bryan Singer was, and if he was just a queer director, we'd be able to say, oh, isn't it interesting how he took out the misogyny from the novella and moved it into this like uncomfortable homoerotic dance in the film, because I do think that that's really fascinating, but instead it has all these loaded fucking implications now.
Because it makes it too real, right? Like we're out of the world of the film and we are in the real world dealing with these issues. And that's what makes it. And again, I find that fascinating. If not, it's not enjoyable.
No.
Yeah.
But I find it fascinating to watch, to think about, to discuss, even though, yeah, we are dealing and discussing some very upsetting things here.
Well, and I think the other thing that I really love about this moment in the film is it kind of shows, I think this is the first time that Todd really understands the consequences of what he's done. And maybe the first time he's really been confronted with consequences that he can't fake his way out of, because he's like, I think he's looking at Dussander as this old guy who's falling asleep drunk on his table. But like, this is when Dussander, at least in the book, and I bring this to the movie, is like, no, do you know how many people I've killed? Do you know how many people I've lied to? Do you know how many people I've manipulated? Like, I've been doing this since before your parents were even born. And you think you can come here and fuck with me,
Yeah.
I mean, he says, can you lie convincingly to judges and reporters? Because I can.
Exactly. I've been doing it for how long? Yeah. Yeah. And it feels really good for that little shit kid to get get that grin wiped off his face,
Well, because he was like, he just walks in thinking, yeah, I can blackmail this Nazi. No problem.
Sure.
Yeah. Yep. And that's a kid who's always gotten everything he's wanted.
Is it ever, because I know in the novella both of them are bluffing, so we know that Kurt doesn't have this paper in the safety deposit box, but in the novella Todd also has nothing.
Yeah.
So is that in the movie? Because I missed that if that's the case.
Todd does have all of the stuff he talks about. When he burns it in the tunnel later, that's what he's doing. So he had all of it.
What he has not done is told anybody else. And that's what he is bluffing on. He has not given a letter to a friend the way Dussander says he's got a letter in the deposit box or something. Yeah. But yeah, he does have the proof.
Got it. Okay.
So speaking of sexual gratification, we should note that there is a cleverly framed moment where Dussander dresses in the uniform at night, looks at himself, and touches himself. It just so happens to also be the moment that we're going to introduce a new character, an unhoused individual named Archie, played by Elias Koteas. And he's going through the trash and just happens to see this going on.
Which sucks for him.
Oops. Yep, it sure does. But I love seeing Elias Koteas pop up. I had the biggest crush on him as Casey Jones in Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles.
Okay,
anytime I see him, I'm like, yes.
Yes, that's your frame of reference. Mine is Crash.
See, I think my husband also was like, because I didn't know who Casey Jones was, but I think they in those new movies they cast Stephen Amell as him, and he was like, he's no Elias Koteas.
Right. Oh, very true. Okay, so we get a montage of Todd studying, but he is being distracted by all of the previous conversations. So, he's working through some things as he's trying to get his A's, to the extent that he crashes his bike in a tunnel right in front of a Nazi symbol as he hears Dussander's voice say, "It never goes away." This felt a little heavy-handed.
Yeah. Yeah. And this is covering, I think, or this is, I don't know, covering maybe is the word for a long string of Todd kind of incrementally falling apart. So I think this is one scene that does feel a little bit on the nose to tell us Todd's not doing well,
Right.
Yeah.
This is where it's finally catching up with him. It's too much for him to process. So he does end up throwing away all of his evidence. And I love this transition. So we hear Dussander laughing as he does this, but then in the transition over to the house, it's revealed that he's laughing because he sees that Todd did get all of those A's on his report card. So they're out of the woods.
Yay!
Hooray!
Poor little white boy.
I know. Couldn't happen to a nicer kid,
Oh, boy.
Okay, well, let me ask, do you think there's any way that Todd turns his life around at this point?
No.
No, yeah, I think the evil's taken root.
I think he'll just find socially acceptable ways to express it or hide it and present in a socially fashionable way.
And ideally, eventually get caught and jailed.
Yeah. Or shoot people from an overpass.
Well, and the reason I ask, and again, I hate to say well in the book, but this is when he starts killing on his own in the book. And I feel like around these parts, and I feel like that is introduced to his character differently, which I think maybe taints his character just a little bit, or paints it in a different light, you know?
Okay, so because that's honestly my big thing, like the fact that there's only one murder that Todd gets roped into and almost blocked, so it's not even his conscious decision to murder this guy.
Right.
I do feel like that robs something from the story.
Yes.
I could see it. I could see the film going harder, but I do feel like the one murder we get is really effective.
Yeah, but it's still not his choice to do it. Like, we have this kid that's going, I mean, however many people he kills in the novella, like, doing it for the lulz, essentially.
Well, and to relieve the pressure that is building up with this knowledge of all of these heinous things. And I think the thing that I'm missing in the film, and I agree, I think the murder is very effective, and I don't necessarily want more. I think I could pity Todd at this point because he has destroyed this evidence. He has tried to be quits with Dussander, and he gets pulled back into it against his will. And I don't think that excuses anything he's done or anything he's going to do. And I don't think he ultimately would have turned around and been Mr. Nice Guy, you know, but it just complicates it a little bit, you know?
Yeah.
Right. I think this makes it slightly easier to get back on Todd's side. I love that there's this moment where they do turn on each other. You know, Todd contemplates pushing Dussander down the stairs, and Dussander reveals he's actually holding a knife. And this is when he reveals, oh, I've got my own document in a safe place that'll go up if anything happens. And yeah, their relationship falls apart. And you think maybe Todd's going to just walk away from all this and it'll be okay. And instead, of course, poor Archie gets drawn back into this. So we should note that Archie is unabashedly a queer character in this movie. So he not only more or less invites himself back to Dussander's house after he catches his eye on the bus, but you have to assume from the costuming, he's either wearing a woman's shirt that's very glittery and he's got a scarf, or he is an effeminate man, or he enjoys dressing more flamboyantly. But he barely obviously says, you know, I've done this before, i.e. sex work. He'll sleep with Dussander if he can take a shower and get $10 to $20 in the morning. But, Dussander himself decides, oh, I need a release. So instead of engaging in sex, he engages in murder play. So he stabs Archie in the back.
Yeah, I just him massaging his head, though, is still like...
It's so creepy.
But again, it's kind of like, is he going to fuck this guy?
100%. I thought, you know what, in a different movie, they would have fucked and then Dussander would have killed him.
Yeah. If it had come out today.
Well, and it's interesting the way you phrase it as he needs a release too, you know, because it's, and he's escalating from cats to people.
But actually, I mean, look, because again, we're not dealing with queerness explicitly in this film, but I mean...
But by virtue of casting Ian McKellen, how do you read this scene differently?
Well, and again, based on... Because with the pie chart that opens this film, you know, it's like these are the people that the Nazis were targeting, with obviously the biggest chunk being for Jews, but there's a little sliver for homosexuals on that pie chart.
Let's break out those pink triangles, baby.
And I'm fascinated by the fact that we don't get any mention of the queer community from Dussander. We do get a bit whenever he brings Todd over and he's like, well, if you're going to behave like a schoolgirl, like that's the closest kind of like emasculating phrasing that we get from this character in this movie. But again, a part of me kind of wishes the movie would delve into that too.
Yeah, I couldn't help if the casting of McKellen was meant to do some of that heavy lifting, right? Like it's a queer director who casts one of the few very notable, bankable queer actors working today. And in some ways, you could think of it as an ironic casting choice, right? Like, oh, the person who would be most likely to be killed by the Nazis is going to play one. But then you factor in all of the homoerotic queer undertones in this film, and I think it just makes it extra fascinating and complicated.
Yeah.
Okay, so Dussander wants to finish this job, but he has a heart attack and has to call Todd in to finish the job. And yeah, this is basically where he locks Todd in the cellar with this guy. Archie comes back alive briefly, and Todd has to finish him off.
I always appreciate it when a murder scene in a movie is particularly messy like this one. Like, not everyone's just good at killing people, you know?
No, this isn't Dexter.
No.
Right. Right. Yeah. And this is upsetting too. Like you really, I mean, I came in liking Elias Cotis a lot. But you really feel for this character, and it's such a terrible way to go out. Like, I'm sure he doesn't think he's getting away when he's down in the basement, but to have like the person who's killing you have a heart attack, I can't imagine what that death was like for that character, you know?
Well, and then you have this 17-year-old kid who's finishing the job, and it's like, Jesus Christ, man.
Yeah.
I don't know. With a shovel, right?
With a shovel, but it's so stylish. Like
Yeah.
when we accidentally hit the light bulb and all of a sudden it goes from very clearly illuminated to almost a red haze filter, which is very symbolic of the murder that we're committing because we're covered in fucking blood, because killing someone with a shovel is messy business. I thought it was very, very stylish. And it also reminded me a little bit, Trace, of Butcher Baker Nightmare Maker.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Also, y'all, go listen to our episode on that, because that is a hidden queer gem.
Oof, that is a messy, fucked up movie. But it's also about, you know, the uncomfortable relationship between an adult and a minor.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so now Todd and Dusander are on even ground because Todd has officially been implicated in a murder, but Dusander is also dying, and Todd does not care.
Yeah, and you get the impression that he's going to let Dusander die, and this is not how it plays out in the book. And I was like, is he gonna watch while he dies? Is this gonna be? And it made me think of Sleeping with the Enemy. Like, I've just killed an intruder.
Okay.
It's like, ooh,
Yeah.
no. But then he changes his mind, and that felt odd to me. I wondered why. Yeah, I guess he just chickened out.
Well, I think he decides that he can't take the risk that Dusander was lying because if anything does come out. But he ends up, cleaning up this entire house. He buries the body. He burns the Nazi outfit back in the tunnel because we love to burn things in that fucking tunnel. This is where we get to see the sad poster for missing cat Timmy.
Okay,
so,
I do have this in my notes. Aw, a lost cat poster.
The cat.
I guess, I was just like, I guess a bunch of cats just go missing in this town.
Well, hey,
why do
that's a
people
Stephen
keep
King
missing
thing.
their animals? I was going to say.
Yeah.
Yes.
A very kingism, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Tabitha,
Although
what do I
well
have against
before
animals? Okay, so Todd goes to the hospital to try to figure out where those 12 fucking blackmail pages are, and this is when he learns that it was all a lie.
It was all a ruse.
What a goose.
It's interesting. I wonder how much the other two believed that I wonder how much they saw through these bluffs. Because part of me thinks they are just enmeshed in this relationship, and they are, as much as they hate it, they're also getting off on it, and they want to believe this blackmail, you know?
It's that push and pull of the S&M relationship, right? They enjoy fucking each other over.
I especially believe it for Kurt, because I think, again, I think once after he puts on that uniform, after he tries to kill this cat and eventually succeeds, I think he's kind of like, it's like that thing where it's like, the danger of getting caught is like, is exciting to you, sometimes sexually in a way. I feel like at this point, he's like, I've got my mojo back, and I don't care, man. Take me to the edge. I mean, we get the Icarus flying so close to the sun metaphor at the very end.
No.
Just spelling out.
I hated that.
He doesn't have anything else to do, too. He's like falling asleep on his table drinking. Like, at least Todd has like baseball, you know?
Yeah. Baseball. That's a basketball.
Jen, we've confirmed this. Todd has his whole life ahead of him.
Oh, that's right. He
Such
does.
a special boy.
Hashtag special boy.
I do also love this moment in the hospital between the two of them where Dusander asks him in a whisper, what was it like? Just like, tell me how it feels when you murder, because I want to know if it feels like how I feel when I murder.
Oof.
Also, you are me now, you know?
Yeah, basically.
Yeah. You have no more moral high ground, you know?
Mm-hmm. So Todd leaves, but his affection, quote unquote, for the old man catches the attention of another patient, Mr. Benjamin Kramer, who is played by Michael Byrne. And he observes that Dusander is so lucky to have a boy like Todd in his life. And then we do see that Mr. Kramer has a telltale tattoo on his arm. And very quickly, well, not so quickly. I actually love how patient and drawn out this sequence with the Jeffersons is as Kramer realizes, I also fucking recognize that face. And the scene of him falling into this nurse's arms and crying is devastating.
I will say, I kind of was like, well, that's really convenient that he just happens to be next to the one Nazi that killed his wife and child, but whatever, dramatic sake. Yeah, no, I agree though, like, because and Singer wisely holds onto this for a very long time as he is crying into this nurse's arms.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that's good. Like, it's showing like real pain because of what he has done. And it's not all just Dussander fucking with Todd. You know, it's like he has actually hurt a lot of people. And I think this is one of the few that we actually get to see in the film.
Yeah.
And I love that he kind of embraces this pain. I also love that it's like, it doesn't matter how careful you are. It doesn't matter how well you have played Todd. You know, you got caught because you fucking did a whole bunch of bad stuff and people saw you do it, you know?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And Trace, I mean, I'm not going to disagree with you, but I think we often get a lot of mileage out of this. I think back to the plot of The Americans, where the FBI agent moves in next to the Soviet spies who are undercover.
Yeah, I mean, it's wrong place, wrong time. Totally get it. I guess in my mind, too, I'm just like, yeah, but it's like 40 years removed from the from the war. So it's like, oh, he's in this town. But it doesn't matter. It works for the movie because the effect, the intended effect is successful.
Yeah.
Well, and I also think there's an element of like how many people he has hurt because there is nowhere he can go where he won't run into somebody, you know, eventually.
Exactly. It's why he had to forge everything.
Exactly, yeah. And why he never talks to anybody.
Yeah, because he can't afford to risk the idea that any person he talks to might have a connection to someone he's killed because he has killed so many fucking people.
Guess he should have moved to another part of the country.
Well, maybe nowhere was safe, though.
Maybe every town has someone that he's killed.
Well, yeah, I love this idea. I mean, I don't love the idea of how many people Nazis have killed, but, you know, obviously this is based in some historical reality where there were a bunch of Nazis who escaped persecution, they got away, and they got to reinvent themselves. I love this idea that you will never be safe. You have committed these fucking atrocities and people will be on the lookout and they will export your fucking ass back to Jerusalem so that you can stand trial, even if you're an old man. You know why? Because you're a piece of shit.
Yeah.
Yeah, and there's this element of like, it feels unfair. It feels like we're denied justice when somebody gets to just live a life for 40 years after this, you know, especially considering how many people lost their lives. But we do see that he is not exactly happy. And granted, it's not nearly enough, but I think I don't necessarily read guilt for what he's done. I read like the consequences of what he's done is that he doesn't get to be a real person anymore, you know?
Right. Yeah.
Although
but that's a selfish reason. Like, that's a selfish reason for him to feel that way.
Totally. Exactly. Well, he's an asshole, you know?
Yeah. A lot of assholes in this movie.
A lot of assholes in this movie, yeah.
All right, so let's introduce a couple of last-minute characters as we head into the wrap-up. So we have Israeli school teacher / Nazi hunter Westcop, who is played by Jean Triska, and we also have Agent Dan Rickler, who is played by personal favorite Joe Morton.
Wait.
Gosh, I love him so much. From the greatest movie of all time, Terminator 2.
What?
Trace, do not say Scandal, say Terminator 2.
No, that's what I was going to say. I was like, what do y'all know him from besides Terminator 2 and Scandal?
That's all we need. That's enough.
Have you not seen those two performances?
What's it? His name is like Mike Dyson, right? Is it Mike?
Yes, Miles Pinder Dyson. Yes,
Miles Dyson. Thank you.
Miles Dyson. Yeah. Oh, love that movie so much.
Yeah, no, I love him in that. Scandal almost made me hate him.
Because he's so fucking good.
Yeah. I mean, he is good, but they kept him around for a very long time on that show.
Yeah. I mean, I stopped watching Scandal in the middle, so I probably left at the high point.
Oh God. Well, he plays the main character. Whatever, it doesn't matter. They kept him around for way too long.
There we go.
They milked that character for everything. He was just a husk by the time that show was over.
Well, when you have Joe Morton, you got to keep him around.
You know, you go watch those 6 seasons of Scandal, and when you get to the end, you tell me, Trace, you were right.
Undoubtedly. Yeah. Okay. So basically, Dusander is caught, and he's in such a weakened state that he's not going to be able to get out of this. And I love that he tries to say, I'm an American citizen and I have voted. And they're just like, sir, drop the fucking act.
No, when he looks down and sees they've already got his fingerprints, it's like, oh, you done fucked now.
I love it.
Okay,
it's so
but
satisfying.
Here's what drives me nuts, and it is the same in the book. They come in and they say, hey, mister, we've got you dead to rights. You're going to suffer all of this pain, and it's going to be awesome, and we're going to get our vindication. And then they leave. And then they leave him to get away. And I'm like, what are you doing? Don't tip your hand.
It's the 80s.
That's true, yeah.
We didn't know any better.
We didn't know he could just, like, give himself an air embolism.
Yeah. Well, in the... Not to be in the book,
how does he kill himself in the book?
He steals medicine and overdoses.
Oh.
Okay.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, but that's the thing, like, somebody that old, that is, of course, what they're going to do when you confront them with the possibility of being, like, dragged in front of the tribunal, and, like, your face is all over the world now, you know? It just, I don't know, poor planning on this instructor's part. Miles Pender Dyson would never.
So I'm going to say something, and I'm going to wrap it in caveats and context. I don't think that suicide is a coward's way out or anything nonsensy like that. I think it's a very significant issue. But in this particular case, I do think it's a delicious coward's way out, because here's this asshole who doesn't want to have to go through any kind of pain or suffering or be put on a public trial. And he decides, oh, you know what? I'd rather just end my own life. And I'm just like, you know what? You're pathetic.
Oh, sure. I mean, but look, if I was in his position, I'd probably do the same fucking thing.
And that's what I am missing in the movie, I think, that I really love in the book, because that is what he's thinking in the book. He's like, I'm going to escape them. There's no way I'm going to suffer this humiliation. But then as he starts to sink, it's like the dreams he's been having that he's been trying to escape, he realizes, oh, this is hell awaits, essentially. And I wish we got a little bit of that in the movie. I don't know how you would do it, but, like, I don't want the ghosts from Ghost to come pull him down. But,
oh, God.
Well, it's like, yeah, because the movie at this point hasn't been very surreal. And I feel like, I totally get where you're coming from. I would like to see something like that. Or even if, like, maybe it is he's having a dream and something morphs into something more sinister, and then, like, it's like he screams and bam, I don't know.
No. I love the fact that this is not ambiguous, because he's very clearly dead, but I do kind of enjoy the fact that this film doesn't take the easy way out with its characters. It suggests that they're both awful to the very end, but also it doesn't pass judgment. It's just, that's who these characters are. They're awful.
Yeah.
And sometimes people are awful and they die relatively easy deaths and they get away with it. Yeah. And that sucks. Yeah.
So speaking of getting away with it, Mr. French does catch on to Todd's lie, but Todd manages to get away because he is the valedictorian and he has to go and deliver his address. So yes, we have this terrible Icarus speech, which to me is so tone deaf and out of sync with what the film is doing, right? Like, we're not passing judgment on any other characters, but then we're doing this really obvious thematic thing. I did not like this at all.
Well, so let's then let's move on to what ends the film, which,
because I did like this a lot more.
Okay, so here's the thing. I did like this, but after going through all the Bryan Singerness of it all and talking about victims, believing victims, and blah, 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 isn't it interesting that someone who is essentially a pedophile that just hasn't been convicted yet ends his movie with, hey, look, victims lie to get what they want.
Yep, they will frame a man with a mustache.
Innocent men like me.
Yeah.
It is, again, I think this film plays extremely differently if you know about the accusations leveled against Bryan Singer and through a contemporary lens. I imagined this was a kind of, ooh, it's almost like he's doing Usual Suspects. The bad guy's getting away with it at the end. Ooh, it's so nefarious. I think it's fascinating, right? Like, this is another film, kind of like Bound, Trace, where when you look at it, the reception that it gets when it comes out initially compared to what we talk about now, completely different. It's like a completely different film.
Yeah, but I think, though, at least, I guess Bryan Singer didn't write Usual Suspects either, but he didn't write this film, so it's like, okay, it's like he wasn't, like, doing this intentionally, but... I mean,
but he was making changes to the script.
Hey, boys, it'd be great if we lose the gun shootout from the novel and we frame an innocent adult for being a pedophile.
Yeah. I do like that this character survives. I didn't want to see him die.
Yeah.
But I'm like really conflicted about how I feel about this. And again, like removing the Bryan Singer element of it and what Todd is doing, like he is terrifying in this scene. And like the anger and the force in his eyes as he is just staring down David Schwimmer is really unsettling when you think about what he's going to go on to do and that he is going to completely get away with this and he is going to learn all of the wrong lessons because of this. Like if I'm just mean enough and strong enough and deceptive enough, then I can do whatever I want. And I think the reason that I don't want to see a shootout. I don't want to see a sniper situation.
Right.
But what I think we would gain if we got that was a more direct line between radicalization of kids like this and the actual consequences of it. Because it's not just Dusander dies, Todd's an asshole, he's going to keep being an asshole. Because we still have not actually seen him kill anyone that wasn't connected to Dusander. And what I like about the way King ends it is he explicitly makes this connection that like, no, connection to this evil creates another psychopath who is going to keep hurting people and keep like spreading this evil in the world. And I think it's a little more ambiguous than I would like with the way this film ends.
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay.
But I can see, I don't know which way I would prefer it to go, you know?
Almost a mix, right?
Right. Yeah. Because I can see benefits and drawbacks to both. And, you know, we've got the books. We have the books ending. Like this movie doesn't take that away. So,
yeah. If anything, just to make another King comparison, it feels like to me Todd is going to grow up to be Greg Stilson from The Dead Zone, the Martin Sheen character from the film, where it's like, oh, I can get away with this and I can be a terrible person. Oh, and you know what? Maybe I'll run for politics.
Well, and I mean, I could totally see somebody like Todd doing that. And I guess like maybe I'm trying to remember what it was like in 98, but like I just feel like we get so much of this like incel radicalization, like this kids like Todd just having guns and running around shooting women who won't like them. Like I feel like we have so much of that now that I want a direct line between that. You know, I want a film that says this is how that happens, you know? But I don't know if that was the tone in 98. I'm having a hard time.
I don't think so.
Remembering how that would feel now. Yeah.
But yeah, so that's it. The assholes get away with it in both instances.
And sometimes they do, you know?
Well, we do close on a very haunting shot of Ian McKellen's dead ass face. I'm sorry, dead space ass face.
We have to be specific in this film.
Dude, when I learned that dead ass was like a phrase that people use just to mean like seriously, I was like, what the fuck? Oh. That's when I felt old.
Oh, welcome to my world, Trace.
But yeah, no, so that is Apt Pupil. Jen, as the guest of honor, any final thoughts on this film before we close out?
It's hard to say I enjoy this film. I am glad this film exists and I'm glad the story exists. And I think if there is anyone listening who would have an issue watching Bryan Singer's film, I think you can get the same messages and the same lessons and the same themes from King's novel, even though it has problems of its own. But I think, and I'm glad that we are talking about this because these are uncomfortable conversations and they are not conversations for everyone. And I always want people to take care of themselves and what they consume. But I think we only move conversations like this forward when we keep talking about it and when we keep talking about the nuances. And so I'm glad that this film exists and that we're talking about it and that y'all were willing to kind of take on these really difficult conversations.
Yeah. I mean, I I wouldn't be surprised if anybody said, you know what, I tried to watch the movie, could not. I tried to listen to the pod, and I could not. You know what? That is completely fair. But yeah, I echo everything that you just said, Jen. It just seems like we can't bury our heads in the sand and say, oh, that makes me uncomfortable. I don't want to have the conversation. I would prefer if people said, maybe that's not for me right now, or that's something I can only dip my toe in or something. But I think we also need to get comfortable with the uncomfortableness, because if not, it's too easy to forget or just sidestep. Like, we need our comfort horrors, but at the same time, sometimes we need the confronting stuff as well.
Yeah, like what you kind of just echoed what Jen said, we can't just forget that these horrible things happen. That's where Holocaust deniers come from. Like, we have to keep remembering these things, talk about these things, because they did happen, and even though it sucks, like, these people deserve to be remembered.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, and I also think, like, it is important for people who are not directly triggered by it to keep the conversation going in a respectful way. It's always important for victims or survivors to share their own stories, but sometimes that's really fucking hard. And that's when we need allies to step in and continue the conversation. And if you are someone who can watch and learn and continue talking about this, I think that it helps a lot. I don't think it's anyone's responsibility to do that, but I think it is a contribution,
Yeah, I mean, to me, it's just like, again, like, I'm not trying to toot our own horns here, but just having a candid reaction, an honest reaction and conversation about how we truly feel about these things without the societal pressures about how we should feel about these things.
Right.
Yes. Yeah, completely agree.
So, anyway, okay. Well, now that lighthearted conversation's out of the way, before we announce what we're covering next week, Jen, first of all, thank you so much for coming on and talking about this with us. Yes. But let everyone know, where can they find you on social media?
Well, thank you again for having me on. This was a delight. And you can find me, Jen Ferratu, on all social places, Jen Ferratu with 2 N's. You can find me hosting the Losers Club podcast and the New Lady Killers podcast, and co-hosting a couple of podcasts on the Anatomy of a Scream Pod Squad. So I will post it all if you follow me at Jen Ferratu.
All right. Well, if you want to get in touch with us, you can reach us on Twitter and Instagram at HorrorQueers. Shoot us an email at horrorqueers@gmail.com. Find us on Letterboxd to keep track of all the films we've covered. Go to our YouTube channel to check out our interviews with various horror filmmakers, and tune in once a month to hear about our most anticipated horror films for that month. If you want to chat with other listeners, please join our Facebook Horror Queers group. And if you want to show us some love, please rate and review us on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Or if you want even more content, please support the show by becoming a patron at patreon.com/horrorqueers. If you subscribe today, you will get about 266 hours of Patreon content, including this month's new episodes on No One Will Save You, Totally Killer, Saw 10, Exorcist Believer, and our audio commentary on John Carpenter's classic, Halloween the Original.
And It Lives Inside.
Yes, and It Lives Inside. Sorry, totally forgot about that.
It's a 6-episode month. You're forgiven.
We have 2 $1 episodes. So y'all, if you want to test it out, go give us $1 and you get 2 episodes this month in addition to all the previous $1 content.
I think it's 30 hours for $1.
It's a good amount for $1. Joe, what are we talking about next week to celebrate Halloween?
There we go. Yeah. You know what? It just wouldn't be Halloween without Halloween. But as much as we're going to have a delightful time talking about John Carpenter's film on the Patreon, we also wanted to dip our toe into a less celebrated text. So, Trace, we're going to check out Halloween 2, but not the 1981 version. We're going to talk about Mr. Rob Zombie's second attempt at Mr. Myers from 2009.
Yep. Full disclosure, I will be rewatching both the theatrical cut that I have not seen since theaters and the director's cut. They are 2 completely different films that have 2 very different goals. So again, if y'all are going to prepare for this, I would recommend watching both of them. But if you only have one, stick to the director's cut.
Okay. Yeah, I've only seen the director's cut, so maybe I will try to do both as well.
I think they're both on that Scream Factory Blu-ray, but both versions of this film are not easy watches. They're quite upsetting, but I'll just say that I went from hating this movie in 2009 to maybe not being a champion of it, but being like it's not wholly successful, but I appreciate a lot of what Rob Zombie is trying to do in this movie.
So it's like every Rob Zombie film.
Kinda, yeah. Okay. No, it's honestly like how you are with Hellraiser Bloodline, where I'm like, it's kind of a mess, but I respect its audacity.
Oh, I love an apologetic episode. Cool, okay.
Anyway, until next week, everyone, we can cross out Apt Pupil.
Indeed, and cross out horror queers.
Atlas Avenue, a long stretch of road that encompasses everything the city of Kennett Heights has to offer. Neon lights, traffic, crime, the hustle and bustle of everyday life, and the craziest of characters. My office was above it all. My name is James Locke, and I'm a PI.
Hello, Mr. J. How the hell you doing today?
Good, Edith. Nearly every year I have a new case. New people to meet, new clues to discover, and new problems to solve. But I do it the old-fashioned way. No technology. Nothing post-1950. Hell, I don't even listen to podcasts, but you should. Atlas Avenue Beat is a spoof of the film noir genre with goofy characters, tons of wordplay, and non-stop raunchy humor. There's also 3 whole seasons out right now with more on the way. Just search for Atlas Avenue Beat wherever you listen to podcasts or visit us online at bloody.fm.